Hi everyone, welcome to the podcast. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex.
Today we're talking about Futureworld, we're talking about season 1 of Osmosis, and we're talking about the next 3 episodes of Dispatches from Elsewhere. Let's kick off with Futureworld, the 1976 sequel to the 1973 Westworld film.
I tweeted a bit about it as I was watching it, and then similar to Westworld, I fell asleep about an hour in, which is slightly better because I think I only made it like 20 or 30 minutes into Westworld before I fell asleep, so yeah. I know at like the 6-minute marker, I was kind of intrigued. We had like an actual event happened. The whistleblower got murdered, which was definitely more exciting than the opening 90 minutes of Westworld. And then it kind of went off the rails a little bit. Like, the whole premise was that 2 years after the kind of tragedy at Westworld, Delos wanted to revamp their image. So they invited these two reporters to basically kind of do a PR spin. Chuck Browning, played by Peter Fonda, and Tracy Ballard, played by Blythe Danner. One was print media who had written like a scathing expose about the Westworld thing, and Tracy was like a TV talk show host, I guess. So they went, and Chuck was convinced that there was some sort of conspiracy going on, and he was always investigating and stuff, and Tracy's whole function seemed to be to either nag Chuck to follow the rules or scream his name because some disastrous thing was happening.
Lex, You're doing her a disservice. He did also send her once to literally flirt with a guy.
Oh, yes, who turned out to be a robot.
Yeah.
So, of course, was not interested in her whatsoever. Because I think it was like the 500 models, and we found out they weren't programmed for sex. The whole thing just didn't really grab me. I went into it was better than Westworld, okay? I will say that. It was definitely better than Westworld. We didn't really get a whole lot of Futureworld. It seemed to be the two of them mostly running around in what looked like some sort of waterworks factory, like behind the scenes. The bits of Futureworld we did get seemed very modern. I mean, not like modern, but 1970s modern. So that was kind of disappointing and a bit misleading. Yul Brynner's contribution was about 5 minutes of a very, very bizarre dream sequence, love scene, or sex scene. I don't really know what I was watching at that point. The ending where Chuck just flips off the Delos guy and hopped onto the tram, and there's dramatic music and the credits roll. It was just oh my god. Yeah, this is a movie to watch perhaps as a double feature with Westworld when you are very high with a group of friends.
Yeah, I think that we can say that this double bill is maybe we watched it so you don't have to, but if you have a sort of morbid curiosity, go for it. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I've written down, better than Westworld. It actually had a kind of story. It actually had stakes. Westworld, it was 90 minutes of two guys basically on a 2-man bachelor weekend, just experiencing the delights of Westworld. This kind of made me think of, I don't know if you've seen the film All the President's Men, where it's kind of like 2 journalists and they're doing this kind of political thriller kind of thing, finding out information that ultimately brings down the Nixon administration. This was kind of, in a similar vein, but with a kind of sci-fi tilt to it. A little bit like Stepford Wives as well, the idea of finding these people, replacing them with robots. But I just feel, again, and there's no doubt in my mind that this could be the first to do it, but the whole, robots replacing humans, or maybe not even robots, it's just something that's being done quite a lot at the moment.
Just to interrupt you there, the very first one where that happened was the 1927 film Metropolis,
awesome,
followed by the 1968 film 2001: Space Odyssey, and that is not even counting the number of 1950s films where aliens impersonated people, notably the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So yeah, this is, even in 1976, this is not a new concept.
And the whole thing was, we're doing this because humanity are on a path to destroy the world by the end of the decade, blah, blah, blah. We've kind of seen that before. I think this had a better kind of final boss fight where the two robot versions of our two kind of protagonists came up against each other. Tracy's, they had this kind of showdown where they both just shot at the same time, and it was quite anticlimactic. There was this moment where we wondered whether Chuck was the one that survived or the robot survived. But like you said, they got to the end, and just as they'd kind of bluffed their way through, he kind of flips the dude off. And that was so, such a strange way to end the film, because I feel like that guy could have stopped the shuttle disappearing. Like, he could have had, a radio in his pocket.
It was a very high-ranking Delos official. He had total control over what was happening in the park. Personally, I would have enjoyed more if the film ended leaving us wondering if Chuck was Chuck.
Absolutely. It was so perfectly set up. They tangled around each other. You weren't sure who was who. One flies off this kind of big, high balcony thing down onto the floor. And yeah, that would have been a much better ending. But it ends with Peter Fonda basically flipping this dude off. And they're just, yay, we did it. Surrounded by robots as well. Surely they could be programmed to kill them.
Absolutely. And I think, they mentioned, either Chuck or Tracy mentioned that their story had already gotten out to, their respective news organizations. So by the time they got home, it would be old news. And I just sort of feel like Delos would have control over communication in and out of their facility, possibly. I mean, they seem to be in control of everything else. And, I mean, they were able to, drug people, abduct them, copy them, do weird medical procedures to them, and return them to their beds without anybody finding out. Surely they could prevent, a couple of reporters from sending top secret information out.
It is what it is. I don't think we'd particularly recommend this, but if you've got a kind of completionist mentality, if you're watching the TV show at the moment, you might want to know where Westworld and Futureworld kind of, they started the ball rolling. And there were definite inspirations for season 3 of Westworld within Futureworld.
I think it could be potentially great drinking game. Every time Tracy screams, Chuck, Chuck, you could take a shot. There are probably a few other instances in there, but yeah, really kind of only watch this as a joke. Don't watch this to seriously be entertained. Let's talk about Osmosis really quickly. So this is a French Netflix original. The premise is that this technology was developed that with an implant, you're able to see the face of your soulmate. And then, when they get the implant, you are both connected via this, tattoo, and, your heartbeats are synchronized. You go into this virtual reality place called V Infinity, where it's kind of sexual. Reminded me a bit of in True Blood, where Jason Stackhouse becomes a V addict, and he and his girlfriend take V together, and they have this kind of sexual LSD trip together. And the V Infinity bits kind of reminded me of that, where it was sort of like an emotional, psychological connection that was over the physical. And inevitably, there are issues with the technology. Things go wrong. Overall, I felt there were way too many storylines happening, because you had the whole thing with their mother, the thing with Esther and Martin, the fact that Esther was not actually Esther, but some random kid their mother had adopted from Eastern Europe and brainwashed into thinking she was Esther. Then there were the 3 main tester stories, plus the Josephine kidnapping and the corporate takeover storyline. And this is only in 8 episodes. So by the end of it, it was just very confused, I felt.
So, I mean, what were your overall kind of thoughts of it as a whole?
I started out really interested. I got kind of bored and less interested about halfway through, and then when I got to the ending of episode 8, my thought was just, and I literally, sitting in my living room, said, what the fuck was that? So yeah, that is my thoughts. I don't know if I would watch a second season of this. I think this season should have been stretched over 3 seasons, or some, maybe even at least 2 seasons, just because of all the different storylines that were happening. None of the storylines I felt really got enough attention or enough exploration, and some of them were really interesting. Others I was just yeah, I don't really care about that. Like, the whole thing with the mother was just sort of like, meh. It's kind of a repeat of what happened with Paul. You know, the implant cured him from this incurable neurological disease. They, you know, cured the mom the same way. It was just kind of repetitive. Like, it was a really great idea. It just was kind of poorly executed.
Overall, I would say it had a kind of depth that I've personally felt has been lacking through the Netflix shows we've watched recently. Omniscient I felt it was kind of on rails. I felt, Ghost Bride was pretty superficial. Vampires was okay, but I just thought that, at its worst, this was kind of a deeper story. It tried to be a deeper story at least, but if I'm being honest, I didn't particularly find any of the characters that likable. You don't have to like people in these stories, but they're either a mole, they're either stealing secrets, they were either kind of like abandoning their ethics. There were a load of corporate jobs worths. I didn't really ever root for anyone. I think the only person I kind of thought was quite a nice individual was Billy, actually.
Billy was my favorite character.
Oh, yeah,
Probably
same.
The only character that I actually enjoyed.
Absolutely, completely the same. They saved a life, were always trying to be ethical, always trying to kind of hold people to account, which I liked. I thought the story had twists, I thought it had turns. The corporate sabotage, again, it's something that's been, corporate, whether they're trying to weaponize something, whether they're trying to monetize something, it's coming into all these sci-fi shows and it's never, ever interesting. It's the bit you don't really want to know about. It's like the terms and conditions when you buy, a PlayStation or something. It's like the manual. You don't particularly want that part of it. You just want to be getting involved in the fun aspect of it. There's so many people trying to get involved in the company at different levels, and it just got very boring very quickly. I think it was trying to say that dating apps, people don't really care, whether you find love or not. It's all about what they want. It's about data farming. Tinder won't put you in a coma, but it'll farm your data. It's all about different levels of ownership, really. I think the creators of it, they seem to be millennials, and I think most of the people that were involved in it seem to be millennials. And it's long established on this podcast that I'm bad at aging people. There seems to be a lot of millennials.
They were kind of borderline. I think. Well, yeah, technically the younger millennials. They were like all in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah. And millennials seem like the first generation where apps are more of a commonplace thing to make dating easier. And Osmosis' whole thing was they're trying to sell happiness, but at the end of the day, I don't really feel like many people were that happy. I know when they were on the stage at the end, I'm sure there were a couple of examples of how it had worked, but it seemed many suffered, really. They didn't really define their terms when they talked about soulmates as well. I just felt like what this emphasised more than anything was that you cannot just buy something that works. It only worked in situations where they were willing to work, willing to compromise.
Just to mention two of the stories, you had Josephine, who was who was Paul's wife, and they were kind of the prototype for Osmosis, like the first ones, and so there was a lot of pressure on them to be kind of the perfect couple. And then Josephine decided that she didn't want the implant anymore. She wanted to feel in control of herself, and she wanted to, she was still in love with Paul and still wanted to be married to him and was still happy with their relationship, but she wanted a more organic relationship. And similarly, Luca and Antoine, Luca got the implant because he wanted to be sure, and he and Antoine were together and quite happy and they loved each other, but Luca had this thing about certainty, and he had doubts, which started the whole thing with Leopold. And at one point Luca said, well, you could get the implant and then we could know for sure, and Antoine said, no, you have to take the risk of loving me. And I think that was kind of almost the central message of the show. And Anna also echoed a similar statement that, to Billy, that they talked about soulmates bringing happiness, but the thing they don't mention is that, as nice as love is, it also hurts.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of philosophical argument that you can't have only happiness and actually be happy. And I think that was kind of the undercurrent of everything they were trying to say. I mean, like Esther I think in every episode just said how lonely she was, even though she was surrounded by all these people. She was a brilliant genius. She created this amazing AI tech. She and her brother had kind of a weird relationship.
They did. Not her brother as well, but they did. Yeah, no, I noticed that.
It was a little over intimate in some instances.
I definitely had the Game of Thrones theme tune going through my head several times.
Yeah, and at one point she mentioned that she had 2 soulmates and they took all of her time, and I wondered if that meant her brother and her mother. It was never really specified. It could have been...
I thought Martin. One was definitely Martin, but I wasn't necessarily sure who the other one was. Possibly the brother.
The term soulmates is very sort of broad and overreaching, and a lot of people have different ideas about it, and it's not necessarily a romantic relationship. It can also be a platonic relationship. So, I mean, her brother could be her soulmate and it not be sexual or romantic in any way, but there were definitely a few scenes where it was kind of like, sure. Like, I did actually recommend it to a friend of mine when I was 2 episodes in, and then a few episodes later I was rethinking my recommendation. Season 2 might be better. It might expand on a few things. They might kind of... I thought Westworld kind of had the same problem. In Season 1, there were too many storylines happening, and then Season 2 kind of streamlined them and cut them back a little bit, and it worked better. So maybe this will do that. It has a lot of potential, I will say that.
There must be something in the Parisian air, because the Niels story, like, I didn't really buy it. It really kind of baffled me. And again, the kind of Anna and Simon story where they had this horrific... It wasn't a meet cute, more as like a meet hate. And still they managed to make it work. But I guess, again, it's just the TV show saying, you got to work at these things, you know. What did you think of the Esther twist? Because I've got to say, of all the 4 Netflix shows, they haven't all had twists, but that was something I kind of enjoyed. They tried to do something shocking, and I kind of appreciated that. I think that there were, looking back, there were definitely clues. I think when the mother was talking to young Paul and just saying, you saved your sister, you always saved your sister, like she was trying to indoctrinate this false memory. But I would be lying if I said I saw that one coming. It might shock you to hear this, but of all of those 4 shows, and they largely have nothing in common, I'm just bracketing them together because they're all kind of, you know, genre shows that are on Netflix at the moment, but this is the one I would most likely rewatch. And even I'm not entirely sure why. I just thought it had some depth, and it tried to take some risks, and it wasn't on rails. And I would watch season 2, I think. So
they did try to do something shocking with the Esther twist, but for me it wasn't overly shocking. I was pretty much from, let's say, episode 2 waiting for them to reveal that Esther had actually died. I wasn't sure what the current Esther was. I thought maybe she was an AI thing, whatever. I didn't exactly, or a clone. I considered that possibility. I did not consider the possibility that she was a completely different child that their mother had just adopted and turned into Esther. So that was a little bit of a surprise. But yeah, the overall revelation that Esther was not Esther was kind of expected for me. And I think out of these 4 shows, Osmosis is probably the bottom of the 4. My top one would be The Ghost Bride, then Vampires, Omniscient, and Osmosis at the bottom.
So, Dispatches from Elsewhere, episodes 3, 4, and 5. To me, this show at the moment feels kind of like the Bible, or like the 10 Commandments. It's direct as possible. Imagine Peter as you, imagine Simone as you, imagine Janice as you, imagine Fredwynn as you. Whether you're stuck in a rut, whether you've got no friends, whether you're in a dead-end job, whether you're just scared to leave the front door, it's just telling you it's not too late. That's what the whole thing seems to be kind of coming down to. And I like that in this show, Peter's quit his job. It's really bad for somebody his age, they say, to quit your job, because it's difficult to kind of change from one industry to the other. So we'll have to see how his life kind of plays out and how that story resolves itself. Simone feels trapped. She said her path regarding art became a track, and it just feels like that her next big decision will define the rest of her life, so she has to choose wisely. And the guy says to her, you're blowing this next decision up to these huge proportions. It's okay for you to be wrong. And I think there are so many people that, whether you relate to Peter, whether you relate to Simone, are going to really take a lot from that. It's very literally just dealing out these life lessons under the guise of this kind of quest they're going on. I don't really think many shows do that kind of thing. They'll have, there'll be these morals that are hidden away, but this show is being as blatant about it as it possibly can be. Well, yeah, I felt kind of inspired, I have to admit, by, episodes 1 and 2, but even parts of this, I just felt like, I'm not someone that particularly feels stuck in a rut. I relate more to Peter than to Simone, but there are things that I know that I could change about my life. And I do feel this kind of inspiration after watching this TV show so far.
It's a really interesting and kind of amazing narrative technique, because the first 4 episodes we focused on each of the 4 teammates, and they are all very different, but in every single episode I have found things about each of them that I identified with. I probably identified the most with Peter. We're kind of a similar age, sort of in a similar position, but there are also things about Simone, like, as you mentioned, the line where a professor says you're allowed to be wrong. That's kind of a lesson over the past few years. I've been trying to teach myself that I don't have to always make the right decision, or sometimes there isn't a right decision. There's just a decision. Just make a choice, and both options can be right, both options can be wrong. You just have to kind of close your eyes and jump. With Janice, the idea of being lonely but not alone, and feeling kind of unappreciated and outdated, and like, it's similar to Simone. Janice had this sort of fear that everyone was just kind of making fun of her or pitying her, or that she was making a fool of herself for going along with all of these things. And then you have Fredwynn, who just doesn't connect with anybody, and he says this when he shows up at Janice's door, I'm doing it again, aren't I? It's like he's not able to control himself. Like, he's so used to being outside of what's going on that even though these 3 people are trying their best to include him and make him part of the team, he doesn't know how to accept that. And
that's the thing. He has basically forgotten what it is to engage with other human beings. And that's the thing I find so interesting about Fredwynn. He's this obsessive compulsive. He likes control. He absolutely does not need to be liked. And I can't even remember if he verbalizes that or somebody else does, but he's just so unaware of himself because he has become this conspiracy nut, probably locked in his house all day. It's a very nice house, but he's just oblivious to himself. And as I was watching this, I'm trying to figure it out. I think I'm 40% Peter, 40% Fredwynn, and like 20% Simone. I have parts of all of these people, and so I'm just getting so much out of this show. I'm relating to so many of these decisions that they're making and these kind of personality traits that they're displaying. I just find it fascinating.
I am really loving this show, but we just mentioned it in Osmosis, and again we sort of have the same thing about data mining and social media, and these kind of companies pretending to offer one thing but really just kind of acting like vampiric parasites for your information. I guess that's kind of the societal fear at the moment. We are so immersed in technology and social media and Pinterest and Twitter and all of these different sites that collect our information. Everything is digital right now, and so the kind of perceived threat isn't so much robots or aliens. The big kind of fear is, and it's true, certain companies have become these massive conglomerates. I think it's like 6 or 7 companies own kind of everything at this point. And we find corporations, particularly large corporations, very scary right now, and it's kind of filtering into all of our media. I have to say, I really enjoy. My favorite part out of all 3 of the episodes is probably Fredwynn's prayer.
Oh my god, yeah.
The fact that he was like, "Dear God, Fireball, Deity," like there were several things he listed off, and I was just like, yes. And then he was like, "Oh yeah, please help me understand my teammates better."
Yeah.
And it's just like, it was so childlike and sweet and so identifiable at the same time. Yeah, I absolutely loved that bit.
Yeah, I've got a few moments written down. My first one is his prayer, but also his pathetic attempt to sleep, because that is something I can relate to completely. I'll put my head on the pillow, and I'll just get up and start doing something almost immediately. Sleep's not happening now. It's time to be, constructive. I've got to be honest, there were, in the first 4 episodes, or maybe the first 3 episodes, there were moments when I was very frustrated by Fredwynn, because this is a direct quote from Simone. I like the magical realism stuff much more than the Illuminati data mining my information stuff. I was kind of enjoying the actual game, and he was doing everything he could to kind of derail the game due to his own kind of neuroses. But as it moved on, I actually started to like Fredwynn more and more, and I really liked seeing him and Janice kind of... The first 2 episodes, it was about Simone and Peter. We learned about who they were, and they had kind of established this bond. And over episodes 3 and 4, we find out that Janice is someone that her husband is in a coma, unfortunately. They've got one child who's flown the nest, and we learn that Fredwynn, he says something like his mother wasn't very good at being a mother or something. So they also have found a really strong connection. And so the 4 of them are just a really great team altogether. They all add their own kind of spin on the game. And I became more happy with Fredwynn's derailing, because it was him. They were kind of showing that he could be friends with people. They were showing that people would take him as he was and would respect him. And I kind of liked that. And so Fredwynn grew on me. He was the one that I was unsure about, but he grew on me as time went on.
I really like the actor. I kind of have an affinity for him a bit, like back from his Andre 3000 days.
Oh, yeah.
I found him kind of interesting. He was very different than the other 3. Simone and Peter and Janice kind of shared things about themselves, whereas Fredwynn was just kind of this enigma. And particularly in the Fredwynn episode, we found out a lot about him, and it suddenly all started to make sense. He was kind of a prodigy. He graduated at 19 with a double major. He was incredibly wealthy by the time he was 21. He was incredibly successful at a very young age, which probably contributed to his isolation, in addition to the fact that he was obviously an incredibly intelligent person. And you sort of get the idea that he's lived a majority of his life with that kind of uber intelligence unchecked and maybe not really stimulated to its full potential, which has kind of devolved into this paranoid conspiracy thing because he just has too much going on in his brain, basically. I think in the Fredwynn episode, I actually started to really sort of care for him and almost feel protective of him. Like, he had some vulnerable moments, particularly with Janice, which he hasn't had up to that point. So yeah, it was good to sort of see another side of him besides the kind of conspiracy nut.
I like the moment where they went into Janice's mind palace to kind of find the next clue, 3125 Spring Street. And I really liked their work in the house where, Fredwynn smelled saltpeter and he lit the match and the whole room suddenly became a story, using the black light in the basement. I liked also finding out how the term divine nonchalance came about, where she mentions it to this guy and he's like, what does that mean? She's like, I'm not sure, it came to me when I was upside down. I just thought that was a very kind of Clara type thing, and her story's intriguing. The 4 of them are they feel like a family now, and I just think this is just a really interesting show, a really interesting way of telling a story, and I'd recommend it to a lot of people, really. And it's preaching out some very positive lessons that a lot of people need to hear, I would say.
I'm going to be very sad when we get to the end of the season. I really enjoy these people. I want to keep hanging out with them kind of indefinitely. And sort of going back to what I was saying previously about apps and media and conglomerate sites and corporate intrusion, I think we've become a very digital society and as a result a very distanced society, and dispatches from elsewhere is very analog. They get notes, the music came in a tape recorder, the whole aesthetic of both the Jejun Institute and the Elsewhere Society are very sort of retro 70s, 80s, a little bit of like the 50s thrown in. Nothing really feels modern. And as a result, the people are kind of connecting with each other and having new experiences and getting out of themselves. And I think that's part of what is so appealing about this, is because we all kind of want to get out of ourselves, particularly right now when we are literally stuck. And so this has a lot of nice messages and a lot of it's sort of encouraging us to step outside of our comfort zone and maybe go outside. I mean, not right now, but in a few months, go outside and talk to people and try new things and have experiences and get away from the screen a little bit.
It's going to be coming to AMC in the UK towards the end of the month. AMC is a channel that barely anybody has. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, do we even have AMC here?
I did
not know we had AMC.
It comes with BT. It's a BT specific channel. I'm on Sky, so
yeah, I'm with Sky. I had BT briefly, and we had like so many problems with the internet connectivity that it was just like, fuck this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I think also that the plan is that this is going to be like American Horror Story, where I think people will come back season after season, but the story will change. That being said, that might kind of fill people with terror. I would be interested to see what these people have to say next time. Obviously, it won't be the game anymore, but if they can recapture this kind of sentiment, it could be something that I would be interested in continuing to watch, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it goes. At any rate, I'm really looking forward to the rest of this season, and I will be very sad when it ends.
Yeah, we'll be doing the next 3 episodes next Wednesday, and then the Wednesday after that we'll be doing the final 2 episodes. Okay, well, thank you for listening. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Podchaser, Podbean. We're also on iHeartRadio now. We're also on YouTube if you prefer to get your content that way. And if you like what you've heard and you'd like to get a t-shirt, or you'd like to get some coasters, or you'd like to get some badges, and you'd like to hear some of our bonus content, we have a Patreon. You can join that for as little as $1 a month.
It's what all the cool kids are doing, and we know you want to be cool, so...
Be cool, conform.
Yep.
And we're on Twitter and Facebook as well. See you next week.